My mother smelled like lavender and motor oil, which sounds strange until you understand that she spent every Saturday morning tending her garden and every Saturday afternoon fixing whatever was broken in the house on Claremont Drive. She was the kind of woman who could regrout a bathroom and grow prize-winning dahlias in the same weekend. When she died 8 months ago, she left me that house, her savings, and the specific ache of knowing I would never again find her kneeling in the dirt at 7 in the morning, humming something old and wordless to her flowers. She also left me a problem I didn't fully understand until a Tuesday in October, when my aunt called and said, in a voice smooth as poured cream, that we needed to sit down as a family and discuss some important matters regarding the estate. My aunt has a way of making important matters sound like a gift she's offering you. She uses that tone the way other people use cologne applied heavily, meant to be noticed from a distance. I had heard it my entire life. At birthday parties where she'd remind everyone that she'd driven 3 hours to be there. At holidays where she'd mention, just in passing, how much the centerpiece cost. At my mother's funeral, where she'd stood at the podium and spent 12 of her 15 allotted minutes talking about her own grief. I told her I would come. What I didn't tell her was that I had already been waiting for this call for 6 weeks. I need to explain what I do for a living, because it matters. I am a forensic document examiner. I work for a mid-sized law firm in Raleigh, and my job, in the plainest terms, is to figure out when documents are lying. Wills that were signed by people who were already dead. Contracts backdated by 6 months. Signatures lifted from one page and transferred to another using software that costs less than a dinner out. I have testified in federal court. I have sat across from men in expensive suits and explained, very calmly, exactly how their forgery fell apart under infrared light. I am good at my job. I tell you this not to brag. I tell you this because when I found my mother's will in the filing cabinet she kept in the spare bedroom, and then found a second version of it 3 weeks later, in a certified envelope that arrived at the house that I was still technically living in, finishing out a lease on my apartment across town, I did not panic. I sat down at the kitchen table with both documents, my loupe and a cup of tea, and I got to work. The second will was good. I want to be fair about that. Whoever had prepared it understood the basics. The paper stock was close, the font was right, the notary seal was real, which told me someone had either bribed or deceived an actual notary public, which is its own category of crime. My mother's signature was practiced and confident, nothing like the shaky, effortful loops she'd made in her final months when the neuropathy in her hands had started taking things from her. That was the tell. My mother's hands had been failing for nearly a year before she died. The signature on the real will, the one I had held a dozen times, the one her actual attorney had drafted, bore the careful, slightly labored quality of someone fighting their own fingers to write clearly. The signature on the second document was fluid, assured. It was my mother's signature from 5 years ago, copied with skill and applied to a page that claimed she had written it 11 months before her death. I photographed both documents. I sent the images to 2 colleagues I trusted. I called my mother's attorney, and then I did something that felt, at the time, almost too simple. I filed the real will for probate. I had it authenticated and entered into the county court system on a Wednesday morning in September, 6 weeks before my aunt's phone call. The house was already mine, legally and officially, in a way that no second document could undo. Then I waited. My aunt's house is 40 minutes south of Claremont Drive, in a subdivision with a name like Whispering Glen or Autumn Ridge, one of those places where every house is the same shade of beige, and the HOA sends letters about mailbox angles. I drove there on a Sunday afternoon in October with the heat just starting to leave the air and the trees doing their best work of the year. I had dressed carefully. Not formally, I didn't want to look like I was expecting a fight, but put together. Dark jeans, a good blazer, the pearl earrings my mother had given me for my 25th birthday. My cousin opened the door before I could knock. He is 3 years older than me and has never, in my memory, held a job for longer than 18 months. He has my aunt's eyes and his father's chin, and an expression that has always reminded me of someone who has just been told the restaurant is out of his first choice. He looked at me the way he has looked at me since we were children, like I was a guest who had overstayed a welcome I was never really given. "Maya," he said, and stepped back to let me in. My aunt was in the living room. She had arranged the furniture the way people arrange furniture when they want a meeting, to feel official, 2 chairs pulled slightly apart, facing the couch, a glass of water on the coffee table, as though this were a deposition. My uncle was there too, seated in the armchair nearest the window, looking at his phone with the focused attention of a man who has learned that looking at his phone is the safest option available to him. "Maya, sweetheart." My aunt stood and hugged me. She smelled like the same perfume she had worn for 30 years. and her hug was the kind that communicates possession rather than warmth. "Sit down. Can I get you anything? Coffee?" "I'm fine," I said, and sat on the couch. My cousin sat beside my aunt. My uncle did not look up. There was a manila folder on the coffee table. I had noticed it the moment I walked in. My aunt touched it the way people touch things they're trying not to appear eager about a brief, casual adjustment that wasn't casual at all. "We wanted to talk about the house," she said. "I figured." She looked at me for a moment. The cream-smooth tone came back into her voice. "This has been such a hard time for all of us. Losing your mother, losing my sister." She paused to let that land. And I know she wanted things to be taken care of properly. She would have wanted the family to be taken care of. "She did take care of it," I said. "She had a will." "She had several conversations," my aunt said, and her hand moved to the folder. "In her last months, when she was really thinking about her legacy, she made some changes to reflect what she actually wanted." She opened the folder and placed the document on the coffee table between us. I looked at it. I let my eyes move across it at the pace of someone reading it for the first time. I could feel my cousin watching me. My aunt had folded her hands in her lap with the careful stillness of someone who has rehearsed this moment. The document in front of me was the forgery. 11 pages. My mother's name at the top. The fraudulent signature on the last page. "She changed the bequest regarding the house," my aunt said. Given how central that house was to our childhood, to our whole family history, she decided it should stay in the family. That it should come to me." She paused. "And she updated the savings allocation as well, to ensure Derek has some stability." I looked up from the document. My cousin was watching me with an expression I can only describe as rehearsed sympathy. My uncle had finally put his phone down and was looking at the floor. "I know this might be a surprise," my aunt said. "I thought about my mother's garden. I thought about the Saturday mornings, the lavender smell, the way she'd call me outside to show me something a new bloom, a particularly fat caterpillar, once a cardinal that had decided her bird bath was its personal property. I thought about the last time I had seen her handwriting, a birthday card she'd pushed herself to finish, even when her hands were bad, each letter deliberate and a little crooked, the effort visible in every stroke. "It's not a surprise," I said. My aunt smiled. It was a careful smile, the kind that is trying to be gracious but is actually relief. "I'm so glad you understand. We thought there might be." "I mean," I said, "it's not a surprise that you did this." The smile held for a moment. Then it didn't. "Excuse me?" I did not raise my voice. I have spent years in rooms where people are lying to me, and I have learned that the most useful thing I can do is stay very still and very quiet and let them hear themselves. "That's a forgery," I said. The signature on page 11 was copied from a document my mother signed in 2019. You can tell by the fluency her fine motor control was significantly degraded by the time that will was supposedly drafted. Her neurologist documented the progression. "I have those records." My cousin leaned forward. "Maya, the notary seal is real," I continued, "which means either you found someone willing to notarize a document they knew was fraudulent, or you told them it was a copy of something they'd already stamped, which is its own issue. The paper stock is close, but not identical to what her attorney uses. The weight is off by about 10 grams per square meter, which you'd only notice if you'd handled a lot of documents." The room was very quiet. "The real will," I said, "was filed with the Wake County Probate Court 6 weeks ago. It's already been authenticated and entered into the court record. The house transferred to me at that point." I looked at my aunt. "Legally, you don't have anything. What you have is a forged will and a notary who is going to have some explaining to do." My aunt's face had gone through several expressions and had landed on something cold and held together. "You don't know what you're talking about. I do this for a living," I said. "Your mother wanted." "My mother called me 2 days before she died," I said, and my voice did not shake, though I had been afraid it would. "She was scared. She told me you'd been coming around asking about the house. She told me you'd said things to her about how Derek needed a fresh start, about how it wasn't fair that she was leaving everything to one child when she had a whole family. She was 81 years old and her hands hurt and she was dying, and you sat in her living room and made her feel guilty." I stopped. I took one breath. "That's what I know about what my mother wanted." My aunt stood up. "I think you need to leave." "In a minute," I said. I reached into my blazer pocket and took out my phone. I pulled up the email confirmation, the one I had received at 9:14 a.m. on a Monday 6 weeks prior, confirming that the probate filing had been accepted and that a court date had been scheduled. I turned the screen to face her. "I also want you to know," I said, That I sent a copy of that document. I nodded toward the forgery on the coffee table to the district attorney's office in this county 2 weeks ago. Along with my written analysis and my professional credentials, will fraud in North Carolina is a Class H felony. The forensic analysis I provided is the same standard I use in federal cases. My cousin's rehearsed sympathy had become something else entirely. "You did what?" he said. It was not quite a question. "Additionally," I said, "the notary whose seal appears on that document, I found her. She's in Greensboro. She told me she was shown a document she was asked to authenticate as a copy of an existing file. She didn't know it was fraudulent. She's cooperating." My aunt was still standing. Her hands were at her sides, and she was looking at me the way people look at things they've miscalculated the size of. "You came here," she said. "You came to my house. You invited me," I said. "You asked me to come to a family meeting. I came." My uncle, from his armchair, said nothing, but he looked up. I stood. I picked up the forged will from the coffee table. "I'm taking this. It's evidence." I tucked it under my arm. "The DA's office will be in touch. I'd suggest you both speak to attorneys." I walked to the door. My cousin was saying something behind me. I heard his voice, the pitch of it, the way it climbed when he was panicking, a sound I remembered from childhood, from the times he'd broken something and heard our aunt coming. I did not turn around. I drove home on the highway with the windows cracked and the late afternoon light coming in flat and gold through the passenger side glass. I did not feel triumphant. I want to be honest about that. People expect a certain kind of feeling in a moment like that, a satisfaction that is clean and complete. And what I felt was something smaller and more complicated, something like the end of a long effort, a muscle finally unclenching. I thought about my mother. I thought about the fact that the people who were supposed to love her had spent her final months circling her like something to be divided. I thought about the card on my refrigerator at home, the one she'd sent me 2 Christmases ago, the handwriting still fluid then, still herself. "I am so proud of the woman you've become. Don't let anyone make you small." I thought, I didn't, Mom. I didn't let them. What happened after is the part people always want to know. And I'll tell it plainly because I think clarity matters here and because she would have wanted it told right. My aunt and my cousin were each charged with will fraud and document forgery. The notary in Greensboro provided a full statement. My forensic analysis was submitted as supporting documentation. My aunt's attorney tried, for about 3 weeks, to argue that the second will reflected my mother's true intentions and that I had filed the probate documents improperly. But that line of argument collapsed the moment my mother's actual attorney provided the documentation of the original drafting process emails, meeting notes, the complete paper trail of a woman who had known exactly what she wanted and had taken careful steps to make sure it was properly recorded. My cousin received a deferred prosecution agreement, contingent on restitution and 2 years of supervised probation. My aunt was not offered the same. The DA's office determined that she had been the primary architect of the scheme and that she had deliberately targeted my mother during a period of physical vulnerability. She pleaded guilty to a reduced charge and received 18 months of supervised probation, a fine, and a permanent note in the court record. My uncle called me once, about a month later. It was a short call. He said he hadn't known the extent of it. He said he was sorry. I told him I believed him about the not knowing, and I meant it. He has not called again. The house on Claremont Drive is mine. I moved in 3 months after my mother died, when my apartment lease ended. I brought my furniture and my books and the specific, complicated feeling of being 31 years old and living in the house where you grew up. My mother's bedroom still smells like her lavender, faintly, the way a scent persists in fabric and wood even after the person who wore it is gone. I have not changed anything in there yet. I am not sure when I will be ready to. Her garden is still going. She had it structured so that something is always blooming. She planned it that way on purpose. So there would never be a season when it was entirely bare. I don't have her knowledge, but I have her notes. She kept a garden journal for 15 years, composition notebooks filled with sketches and planting dates and observations. The dahlias near the fence prefer more water than the label suggests. The rosemary is drought tolerant, but will sulk if you ignore it entirely. I have been following her instructions the way you follow a recipe from someone you love carefully, wanting to get it right, feeling them over your shoulder. Some mornings I sit on the back steps with my coffee and just look at it. The light is different here than it was in my apartment. Softer in the early hours, the way light gets when there are trees filtering it, when there is actual earth nearby absorbing and releasing the warmth of the day. It is quiet in a way that my apartment never was. Sometimes the quiet feels like peace. Sometimes it feels like something else, like a room that is slightly too large for one person, like a sound you keep almost hearing. I think about something she said to me once, when I was in college and going through something difficult that I couldn't fully articulate at the time. She had been quiet while I talked, and then she had said, "The hardest thing isn't fighting the people who come for what's yours. The hardest thing is knowing you deserve it in the first place." I didn't understand it then. I think I understand it now. The letter came 4 months after the hearing. My aunt's handwriting on the envelope, which I recognized before I saw the return address. I stood at the mailbox at the end of the driveway for a long moment, holding it. The afternoon was warm and still. A bird was doing something territorial in the oak at the corner of the lot. I thought about opening it. I thought about what might be inside: an apology, an accusation, an explanation, a plea. I thought about what any of those things would cost me to read, what they would take up, what space they would occupy in a house I was still learning to simply live in. I went inside. I set the letter on the kitchen counter. I made dinner. I washed the dishes. I went out to the garden in the last of the evening light and did what the notebook told me to do for the time of year, which involved pruning back something that had gotten ambitious and cutting a few stems that were spent. Then I came back inside, picked up the letter, and without opening it, held it over the kitchen sink and lit the corner with the gas burner. I watched it go. It took about 12 seconds. Then I washed the ash down the drain and dried my hands on the dish towel, the yellow one with the little lemons on it that she had bought at a farmer's market somewhere years ago, and I went and sat in the living room in the good chair by the window, the one that catches the evening light just right, and I let the house be quiet around me. This is what I want to say to anyone who has found themselves in a room where the people who should have loved you have decided to take what is yours. You are allowed to be prepared. You are allowed to be more prepared than they expected. You are allowed to have spent months quietly doing the unglamorous work of documentation and authentication and court filings and consultations with professionals while they were busy congratulating themselves on how easily this was going to go. You are allowed to walk into that room knowing exactly what you know, and to sit with your hands folded and say very little until it is time to say something specific and devastating and true. You do not have to be dramatic about it. Drama is for people who are improvising. When you have done the work, you can afford to be calm. Calm is its own kind of power, a quieter one, but it lasts. My mother knew that. She built a life on it. She gardened and fixed things and raised me mostly alone after my father left, and she did not spend a lot of time being theatrical about any of it. She just kept doing the next right thing. She kept the notebooks. She kept the records. She made sure her attorney had 2 copies of her will, and she made sure I knew where the filing cabinet was, and she made sure, in every way that she could manage, that what she wanted to leave me was actually, legally, verifiably mine. The house on Claremont Drive will be mine for as long as I want it. My cousin works in Charlotte now. I do not know what he does. My aunt, as far as I know, is still in the subdivision with the beige houses. My uncle sends a card at Christmas. I send one back. The dahlias by the fence are doing well. I gave them extra water in July the way the notebook said, and they responded the way she promised they would, which is to say, extravagantly, almost showily, like they were trying to prove a point. I cut a few and put them in the blue glass vase on the kitchen table, and I sat there eating breakfast with flowers my mother had planted years before she knew she was sick, years before anyone had decided to come for what she'd left behind. And I thought about how some things persist regardless. How some things, if you tend them right, just keep blooming. I am still learning what I deserve. I think that might take a while. But I am in no hurry. I have a house and a garden and notebooks full of my mother's handwriting, and the mornings here are very beautiful. And I have, it turns out, all the time in the world.